Hey, welcome to today's short rant, and I'm going to talk about the fact that India is buying Russian oil. They've increased their purchases of Russian oil in the face of sanctions around the world, and that has turned out to be, Putin picked his time right. This is kind of the subtitle I got going here. So let's take a look at the trade situation in the world. Okay, so when I study this stuff, right? And in order to understand what happens when sanctions are put on trade, you need a three-nation model. You need to model the sanctioner, the target, and the rest of the world. Rest of the world, or ROW, turns out to be really important. And for sanctions to have any effect, the amount of trade between the target and the sanctioner before the sanctioning goes in effect has to be larger than the amount of trade in that product in the rest of the world, theoretically. Now, it doesn't have to be fully the amount, but the point is, when you put a trade barrier up, when the sanctioner puts some sort of trade barrier up, the trade that previously went between the sanctioner and the target now tries to go around. It tries to go through the rest of the world. So the target tries to sell whatever product this is scientific. This is social science notation here, but we have, M is the product, and QST is the amount, the quantity between the sanctioner and target. And basically, what happens is the target tries to sell its product to the rest of the world, what it would normally have sold to the sanctioner. The sanctioner tries to buy it from the rest of the world. And if there's enough of the stuff in the rest of the world to, being produced and consumed, then that stuff can go to the sanctioner, and the people in the rest of the world who would normally have bought it from amongst themselves buy it from the target, and you get just trade diversion. However, if the quantity is fairly large, it doesn't actually in real life have to be more than what's there. But if it's fairly large, then it's hard to do that, or impossible, right? There might not be enough being produced in the rest of the world. And so what you get is the target will try to dump its product, right? If the target was selling a lot to the sanctioner, when it tries to sell it in the rest of the world, it'll basically be dumping its product. And the rest of the world might not want to buy it all. And if they do, they'll buy it at a lower price. Meanwhile, the sanctioner goes out and bids up this product, whatever it is, M. It's going to be oil in this example from Russia, but in general, it tries to buy it up and it raises the price. And what happens when a sanction is effective in the theoretical model is that we get a shift in price, right? That we get two prices. We get the world prices split from one price that was being paid previously to two prices. One that the target is paying, which is lower than it had been previously, this P star or P asterisk, and one that the sanctioner is paying, which is higher than the rest of the world. And by the way, I have a little line here. It may be even in such an environment that some trade continues to exist between the sanctioner and the target. But the key thing is, ROW makes out like a bandit. ROW gets to buy probably more of the product from the target at a lower price, more than it previously consumed, and it gets to sell what it produces to the sanctioner at a higher price, and probably again they're selling more at a higher price and buying more at a lower price. That's an unambiguous gain. So I always say that ROW is so important. It's the denominator, right? You take the amount of trade between the sanctioner and the target, divide it by the production in ROW, and that gives you an idea of what's going to happen with the sanctions. So ROW is the denominator in the power relationship, if you will, here. Also, ROW makes out like a bandit. ROW unambiguously benefits from sanctioning in this case. So let's apply this to Russia and India. Or I should say Russia, the U.S. and EU. Russia's the target, U.S. and or Europe, NATO, because it's not the EU because Britain's involved, but those guys, right? They're the sanctioner. What was the pre-sanctioning trade in oil? We're just looking at oil here. Well, it was about 5,118,000 barrels a day. In other words, 5.1 million barrels a day in November 21st, according to the IEA. All right. That's the amount. Now that turns out, depending on what you divide it by, right? It's five. That's 8% of the global trade in oil, right? About 20-30% of the OECD, the developed countries trade, right? But it's not most, right? But it's a lot. That's the point. It's a lot. And so now, if Russia is being cut off from that or threatening to be cut off from it, what happens? Well, Roe in this case is India. India's the main one that's coming up. China, however, is also playing a role. And India and China are basically the biggest players in the rest of the world, right? They can stand in for Roe. And what we've seen is India has increased its oil purchases. It averaged 33,000 barrels a day in 2020. And actually, I've seen in January of 2020, actually 2021 was when they were at 33. In January of 2022, they were importing nothing. Right now, they're importing 700,000 barrels a day, and that may be going up. Right, so they have definitely done it, and they interview them and they say, look, it's cheap. Right? We're getting cheap oil. Of course, we're importing it, and Russia is now selling a lot of oil to India, and India, for its part, is refining a lot of it and selling diesel to Europe, right? Replacing the lost diesel production. And so we're seeing a lot of this, exactly what the model says. I mean, it's just textbook. China's a little more circumspect about what they do, so the focusing less. But they've gone from 800,000 barrels a day to 1.1 million. Together, this is an increase in 967,000 barrels a day. Not nearly as much as the EU trade, but we're just got two nations or other people that could buy. The strict accounting of this has to wait because the data right now doesn't really exist it's fragmentary. I'm getting New York Times articles. I don't have nice IEA statistics right on this stuff. But what we are also hearing is the price is lower. It's dropped $30 a barrel for the stuff they're selling to India, presumably also to China. And so that's what we would expect. And so we're seeing the rest of the world is benefiting. And I say, look, you got to look at the price. That price differential is what's so important. Sure, India and China are buying Russian oil, and you got to expect that. This is what I like to call the problem of neutrality and sanctioning, that Roe is there, right? And Roe is so important, and the neutral countries are the ones that constitute Roe. And it's always been a problem in sanctioning. Right? The U.S. in the League of Nations, the United States was not a participant of the League, and everyone thinks in terms of military strength and its lack, but really U.S. trade threatened to bust all the sanctions that the League of Nations wanted to or might have imposed. And so problem neutrality is a constant one. The thing is, though, at first I said Putin picked his time right. Yes, they are now, they're probably, because the sanctions on oil are starting to be put into place. By the way, U.S., we sanctioned Russian oil very quickly. It was 147,000 barrels a day. It was nothing, right? Europe is the one that really imports a lot of Russian oil. And so, we're going to see that tap closing. Not sure how much is closed, but, the lower volume at lower price is how sanctions are supposed to work. The problem is the price of oil went up, right? The price of oil is very high. And so as Nikkei Asia has calculated, basically, even though Putin is selling at basically fire sale prices, Russian oil revenue has remained constant. Now, theoretically, what you don't make, you lose, right? So in theory, in these economic models and stuff we do, we would say, hey, they're not making, there's a high world price, they are foregoing, they aren't getting the benefit they would have gotten otherwise, which is true. On the other hand, in terms of resisting sanctions and keeping your political power, if you're generating the same revenue, you can probably keep employment up. And what are the political costs or the politically relevant costs? And they might be a little different than this kind of theoretical, your opportunity cost of not selling things. And so Russian oil revenue has remained constant, when you calculate this year versus that year, because the underlying price that the Russians are discounting from is so high. And so Putin, in the end, really picked his time right. But what we're going to want to watch is we're going to watch what's going on with India. We're going to watch what's going on in China. On the other hand, I guess my point is the model really plays out. It's just playing out exactly the way you would expect it. And this is always going to be the problem with sanctioning, that the rest of the world is involved in. So you may be big, you may be a big nation, or you may be a big coalition of nations. But the divider, the denominator is the rest of the world. It's you versus in comparison to the rest of the world. And that can be difficult as the rest of the world gets bigger and bigger, right? And that's, the rise of India and India and China are the rest of the world is getting bigger, and China definitely at the fastest rate. So that's what's going on. We'll just have to keep an eye on it. A little bit longer short rant, but I hope it was informative for y'all. Thank you for listening to my short rant. I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and though I teach at Troy University, this video is my own work. Troy University has neither approved nor reviewed the content, so there. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, please feel free. And if you're wondering who would employ a guy like this, or maybe you'd love to be a student. It's not an ad, but I would love to have more students. Feel free to check us out at www.troy.edu. And we're going to end up finishing off listening to Tonight at 8 by Shane Ivers.